September 10th, 2025. A university campus, a charismatic speaker, and a single gunshot that echoed across a divided nation. In the chaos that followed the assassination of Charlie Kirk, a face was quickly put to the tragedy. 22-year-old Tyler Robinson. The media painted him as a cold-blooded killer, and public opinion was swift and brutal. Before he ever stepped foot in a courtroom, Tyler Robinson was convicted in the court of public opinion. They tried to silence him, to bury him under an avalanche of accusations and media-fueled rage. But in the quiet, formal halls of justice, the first battle of a long war has just been fought. And in a surprising turn, the man they tried to silence just won. This is a story of how a small procedural victory could change everything in the fight for a man's life, and what it says about the fragile state of justice in our age of outrage. On that September day, conservative activist Charlie Kirk was holding one of his signature Prove Me Wrong events at Utah Valley University. He was in the middle of a debate, surrounded by a crowd of students under a tent, when a single shot rang out. Chaos erupted. The activist, a lightning rod for political debate, and a close ally of former President Donald Trump, had been hit in the neck. He was later pronounced dead at a local hospital. The investigation was intense, fueled by nonstop media coverage and the raw emotion of a politically charged crime. Just over a day later, a 22-year-old named Tyler James Robinson surrendered to authorities at the sheriff's office in his hometown, a 3-hour drive from the scene. Almost immediately, the narrative was set. The Utah County Attorney announced 7 charges against Robinson, including aggravated murder, and declared the state's intention to seek the death penalty. The motive, prosecutors claimed, was political. To the public, the case looked open and shut. A suspect was in custody. The prosecution sounded confident. Political leaders and commentators had already delivered their verdicts on TV and social media. The machine of public condemnation was running at full tilt, grinding away any idea that the story might be more complicated. But behind the headlines, a different process was starting to unfold. It's a process that is slower, more deliberate, and governed not by emotion, but by centuries of legal principle. And within that process, Tyler Robinson's defense team was getting ready to fight its first crucial battle, a battle not over guilt or innocence, but over the very image of justice itself. To really get the significance of what just happened in that Utah courtroom, we first have to understand the world this case lives in. Long before a jury is ever selected, a public trial begins. It happens on our TV screens, in newspaper headlines, and most viciously, all over our social media feeds. This is a trial by media, and in a case this big, its influence can be overwhelming. From the moment Tyler Robinson was identified, the information being released started building a very specific character. He wasn't just a suspect. He was a Charlie Kirk killer, the assassin. News reports detailed the alleged weapon, a Mauser .30-06 bolt-action rifle, found near the scene. They described how he supposedly positioned himself on the roof of a nearby building, a sniper in waiting. Surveillance images, grainy and indistinct, were broadcast to millions, with commentators pointing out who they thought it was and picking apart his movements. According to the prosecution, his own father saw the image on the news and thought it looked like his son. Every little detail, released piece by piece, acts like a brushstroke, painting a portrait of guilt for the public. It's what Robinson's own defense team called a content tornado in a court filing. It's the perfect description for the whirlwind of information, speculation, and outright condemnation that swallows a suspect in a case like this. The sheer amount of coverage creates an echo chamber. A news anchor makes a definitive statement. A politician tweets it, and thousands of users share it, adding their own inflammatory comments. The line between fact and allegation blurs until, in the public's mind, it's gone. And this is where one of the most fundamental pillars of our legal system comes under attack: the presumption of innocence. This principle isn't just a polite suggestion. It's a constitutional right. It means that every person accused of a crime is considered innocent until the prosecution can prove their guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. It's the bedrock of a fair trial. But how can that right survive a content tornado? When potential jurors have been exposed to a month of coverage that calls a defendant a killer, shows his face next to descriptions of the crime, and details evidence before it's ever been challenged in court, the job of finding an impartial jury becomes almost impossible. The mind, once it hears a story, struggles to erase it. The image of the accused, splashed across every screen, gets tied to crime itself. The choice of imagery is especially powerful. In the beginning, every time Tyler Robinson's name was mentioned, it was usually next to his mugshot or a still from a surveillance camera. These are not neutral images. A mugshot is taken at a moment of crisis and powerlessness. It inherently frames a person as a criminal. A grainy photo of a figure on a roof frames him as a predator. It's a stark contrast to the images used for a victim, usually a professional headshot or a smiling family photo, which rightfully makes us feel sympathy and highlights their humanity. Robinson's defense attorneys knew this. They argued that the intense media coverage was creating a carnival-like atmosphere that was poisoning the entire process. They knew that if their client showed up to court in a jail jumpsuit and handcuffs, that image would just reinforce the narrative of guilt the media had already built. It would be a visual stamp on the public's verdict. This is the onslaught Robinson was up against. He wasn't just fighting the state of Utah. He was fighting an idea, an image of himself that had been burned into the nation's mind. They had tried to silence any other story, to make the trial a mere formality. And that's why his defense team chose to draw their first line in the sand over something that might seem superficial: the clothes he would wear in court. On Monday, October 27, 2025, the case shifted from a court of public opinion to the 4th District Court in Utah County and into the hands of Judge Tony F. Graff Jr. The defense had filed a few motions, but the one that got everyone's attention was their request to let Tyler Robinson show up to all his pretrial hearings in street clothes and without restraints. To an outsider, this might sound minor. In a capital murder case, where a man's life is on the line, who cares what he wears? But in the world of legal strategy, it matters a lot. This motion wasn't about comfort or vanity. It was a direct challenge to the trial by media. It was about the presumption of innocence. The defense's argument was simple and based on solid legal history. They argued that forcing Robinson to appear in a jail jumpsuit would be a constant visual reminder that he was locked up. Every photo taken, every video clip aired would show him not as a man accused of a crime, but as a man already branded a criminal. They said this would permanently poison any potential jury pool, making a fair trial impossible. The U.S. Supreme Court even ruled on this back in 1976 in Estelle v. Williams, recognizing that making a defendant stand trial in prison clothes creates an unacceptable risk that the jury will be swayed by his appearance, not the evidence. The prosecution and the Utah County Sheriff's Office fought the request, citing security. This is a high-profile, aggravated murder case. The hearings were going to be emotional, and their top priority was keeping everyone in the courtroom safe: the judge, the lawyers, the staff, and Robinson himself. They even suggested Robinson could appear on a video call from jail to solve the publicity problem. The defense shot that down immediately, arguing a defendant has a right to be physically present to confront his accusers. This left Judge Graff to perform a delicate balancing act, weigh the defendant's constitutional right to be presumed innocent against the state's very real need for security. In his ruling, Judge Graff acknowledged extraordinary media attention surrounding the case. He saw the defense's point about prejudice, and in a clear, decisive statement, he declared, "Mr. Robinson shall be dressed as one who is presumed innocent." He ruled that Tyler Robinson would be allowed to wear civilian clothing during all of his court hearings. This was a victory. It was a court directly pushing back on the narrative of prejudged guilt. It was a judge confirming that inside his courtroom, Tyler Robinson was not the Charlie Kirk killer. He was the accused, entitled to the appearance of an innocent man until proven otherwise. The judge essentially told the state to stop dressing Robinson in a costume that screams guilty. But Judge Graff didn't ignore the security concerns. He also ruled that Robinson must remain in restraints, ordering the use of the least restrictive ones possible. But then he added a second, crucial part to his order. He put strict rules on the media, banning any photos or videos that showed Robinson in his restraints. This part of the ruling is just as important as the clothing. The judge wasn't just controlling Robinson's appearance. He was controlling the image of his appearance that would be broadcast to the world. He allowed for security, but he stopped that security from being used to create prejudice. The public would see Robinson in a suit, not in shackles. It was a thoughtful solution to a complex problem, a perfect example of a judge carefully balancing the scales of justice. For the first time since his arrest, the story around Tyler Robinson wasn't totally controlled by the prosecution and the media. A judge had stepped in, not on the question of guilt, but on the question of fairness. It was a small battle, a procedural skirmish in a war that will last for years, but its symbolic power was huge. It was a signal to everyone watching, the public, the media, the prosecution, that this would not be a show trial. It was going to be a fight, and Tyler Robinson had just won the first round. One pretrial victory doesn't win a case. The mountain of evidence the prosecution claims to have is still there. The 7 felony charges, including aggravated murder, still stand. The state's plan to seek the death penalty is still on the table. So what does this ruling really mean for the case of State of Utah versus Tyler James Robinson? First, it changes the visual story of the trial. As the case moves toward preliminary hearing in January 2026, every image the public sees of Robinson in court will be a man in a suit. Over time, this slow, steady stream of images will start to chip away at the initial flood of mugshots and surveillance stills. It introduces a new picture into the public mind, the image of a defendant, not a prisoner. For a defense team fighting a tidal wave of bad press, that's a huge strategic win. Second, this is a major morale boost for the defense and for Robinson himself. Facing the full power of the state, especially in a death penalty case, is an isolating and crushing experience. An early win like this shows that the system can work and that the judge is committed to a fair trial. It proves they aren't powerless against the state's narrative. It establishes Judge Graff as someone deeply concerned with constitutional rights. As he said in a previous hearing, regardless of who is watching, we must fulfill our roles with integrity, civility, and diligence. Neither Mr. Robinson nor the people of Utah deserve anything less than the fair and impartial administration of justice. This ruling was proof he meant it. Third, and maybe most importantly, this ruling gives us a peek at the defense's strategy. Their first big fight wasn't about evidence. It was about process and perception. This tells us a key part of their defense will be arguing that Robinson can't get a fair trial in this environment. This clothing motion is likely just the first shot in a much bigger battle over that content tornado. This could lead to other legal moves. A change of venue motion to move the trial to a different county with less media saturation now seems very likely. The judge himself acknowledging the extraordinary media attention helps lay the groundwork for that exact argument. The defense will also almost certainly keep fighting to limit cameras in the courtroom, try and create a sterile environment where legal arguments can be weighed on their own merit. This early victory also forces the prosecution to adjust. It sends a message that this defense team is smart, aggressive, and won't give up any ground. The prosecution can't just ride the wave of public opinion. They'll have to prove every single element of their case under the watch of a judge who has already shown he won't bend to public pressure. Of course, tons of questions remain. Does the defense have a real counter-narrative? What will their defense actually be at trial? Is there evidence we haven't seen yet? Right now, we don't know. What we do know is that the idea that this was a done deal has been shattered. The notion that Robinson was already convicted has been broken. This victory was a reminder that the American justice system, with all its flaws, has powerful tools to protect the accused. The fight for Tyler Robinson's life will be a long, grueling marathon. But the first shots have been fired, and against all expectations, the man they tried to silence has just fired back and won. The case of Tyler Robinson is more than just a trial about one man. It's become a test for our justice system in the face of massive public pressure. The core principle of our legal system, the presumption of innocence, was just tested, and for a moment it held firm. But this was only the first test of many. The real battle, the one over guilt or innocence, hasn't even begun. We haven't seen the evidence presented in a courtroom. We haven't heard witnesses cross-examined. The story is still incomplete. This ruling is a critical chapter, but it's not the end of the book. It proves that the fight for a fair trial is far from over, and that in the quiet world of the law, a single ruling can change everything. Now I want to turn it over to you. What are your thoughts on this ruling? Do you think letting a defendant wear civilian clothes is essential for presumption of innocence, or should security always come first? And how should our justice system handle the intense pressure from media and public opinion in cases like this? Let me know what you think in the comments below. This is a conversation worth having. And if you want to follow this case and see more deep dives into law, media, and justice, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. Thanks for watching.